It'll be fun. And now I'd like to introduce 4 fantastic access advisors from Accessibility Services to talk with you about applying accommodations to the virtual teaching and learning environment. Alicia Wolashuk, Ann Wade, Janet Arnold, and Juliana Walker not only work with students to establish accommodations that allow those students to participate fully in your classes, but they also work with faculty to help them figure out how to implement those accommodations. So they are fantastic folks to have on campus and a huge resource and wonderful human beings as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them, and I will just be here in the background doing my recording fun things.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think we'll start with a few introductions. My name is Alicia Wolashuk, and I am one of the Access Advisors in Accessibility Services, and I actually just started my 7th year in this role.
I'll go next. I'm Janet Arnold. I've been at Mount Royal for 10 years. I've worked in counseling and as human rights advisor for a few months, and I've been with Accessibility Services for 8 years. I also teach in psychology.
I'll go next. My name is Juliana Walker, and I just started my 3rd year as an Access Advisor, and I absolutely love it here.
And I'm Ann Wade, and I just started as an Access Advisor in May. So pretty new to the department, but I'm loving it.
And I'll jump in if I may. I'm Pat Pardo, and it is my great pleasure and privilege to be the director of the awesome Accessibility Services at Mount Royal University. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of working with, you may be wondering why you're hearing my voice, but perhaps just getting a picture with a big question mark. I understand that that's how this sometimes shows up. I'm joining you by audio only because I'm a person who experiences a disability-related barrier myself. I experience barriers associated with sight loss. And as a result, I work with some very wonderful Star Trek-y technology that is fabulous, but doesn't always play well with mainstream platforms. So I'm not able to participate in the video portion of the Google Meet or Zoom or any of those other wonderful things that are at play right now. But it is my pleasure to be here also to engage in dialogue and conversation around the co-creation of an accessible, equitable, and inclusive learning environment.
Great, thanks. So our presentation is called Applying Accommodations to the Virtual Teaching and Learning Environment. I would like to let you know that our presentation is divided into sections, and we will be pausing after each section for an opportunity to respond to any questions. And certainly we'll have some opportunity at the very end of our presentation as well for any additional questions. So next slide, please. Also, just to note that we have used a number of accessibility features in this presentation. So for instance, our slides use a simple font and high contrasting colors. The information is presented through multiple means. So in other words, the information is available through written and oral means. Presenters will fully read the contents of the slides, describe all images, and announce when moving to the next slide. And there are also alternative text tags which are provided for all images. So describes images when using a screen reader. Just to give you a little more information about this, for individuals who may be experiencing a vision-related impairment, they do sometimes use screen readers to access the information on computers. And so with the alt tags, screen reader, when it comes across an image on the computer, it will be able to describe what the image is so that the person still has access to that information. Next slide, please. So overview, we've done a few introductions, and then we'll get into what does Accessibility Services do. We'll talk about the virtual handbook that we've created. We will discuss some process changes, assistive technology, universal design, some specific accommodations, so accommodations that may not be applicable to the virtual learning environment, accommodations that may be available to all students, as well as those accommodations that have been modified for the virtual learning. We will also discuss recording and access to PowerPoint notes, as well as assessment and universal design. And on this slide, there is the image of somebody's right hand holding a blue marker with the word, "Why are we here?" Next slide, please. So what does Accessibility Services do? Mount Royal University is committed to access, diversity, and equity. Accessibility Services assist the university in creating an accessible learning environment that encourages full participation in academic courses for students experiencing disability and/or medical-related barriers. Reasonable accommodations are tailored to each specific individual student based on the information that is in the medical documentation. So we will go into more details in a few upcoming slides here. And we encourage student development and educate Mount Royal University about becoming a more accessible, equitable, and inclusive learning environment. Next slide, please. So the students who are registered with Accessibility Services experience a wide range of visible and invisible disabilities. We do have students whose barriers fall along the autism spectrum. And here we see the image of a puzzle with 4 different colored pieces: green, yellow, blue, red, and the word autism. We have a number of students who experience learning-related barriers. So this might be something like a learning disability in reading, a learning disability in math, and here we have the silhouette of a person holding a book. Students experiencing medical-related barriers. This might be something like arthritis or a concussion, and here we have a blue medical symbol. Students experiencing mental health related barriers. This could include something like generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, maybe bipolar disorder. And here we have the silhouette of a head with a question mark. Mobility related barriers can include I don't know, maybe somebody goes skiing on the weekend and breaks their arm or their wrist and can no longer write their exam. Here we have the silhouette of a person using a cane, as well as the silhouette of a person using a wheelchair. And then sensory related barriers, so maybe something like a vision or hearing related impairment. And here we have 2 images, one of an eye and one of an ear with horizontal lines through them. Next slide, please. This chart is showing the percentage of students who are registered with our office by their primary disability during the past academic year. So during 2019-20, the total number of students is 1,348. I would also like to point out that although this chart is organizing students by their primary disability, we have many students, probably most of them actually, who experience more than one disability. So students who have documentation of maybe 2, 3, 4, even 5 disabilities on file. So here we have 437 of our students, or 32%, experience ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder as their primary diagnosis. Psychiatric diagnoses, we have 373 students, or 28%. Learning disabilities, 258 students, or 19%. The other category consists of disabilities that don't nicely fall into one of our other categories. So it could be something like a communication disability, maybe a cognitive disability. It could also include students who are still going through that screening process with their specialist. We have 100 of those students, or 7% of our students. Chronic medical and systemic, we have 79 students, or 6%. Mobility functional, we have 35 students, or 2%. Temporary disability, again, maybe something like a concussion or a broken arm. We have 22 students and 2%. Acquired brain injury is also 22 students, or 2%. Deaf, hard of hearing is 12 students, or 1%. And blind and partially sighted is also 12 and 1%. Next slide, please. And this chart here is showing the number of students served per academic year. So you can see a fairly steady increase. In 2014-15, we had 921 students registered with our office. In 2015-16, we had 1,007 students. In 2016-17, we had 1,119 students. In 2017-18, we had 1,291 students. In 2018-19, we had 1,261 students, and then last academic year, 2019-20, we had 1,348 students, and so this is showing a 46% increase in 5 years. Next slide, please.
So what is an accommodation? Accommodation means making changes to balance the diverse needs of an individual and or group of people. Accommodation stems from human rights legislation. Academic accommodation on grounds of disability go through accessibility services. Non-academic accommodation go through the human rights advisor. These include such things as accommodation for religious holidays and family status, for example, pregnancy. And on this slide, there is a group of people are standing together, and to the left of the group is a single person alone hanging their head. Next slide. On this slide, there are 3 images. The first has 3 people of different heights standing on some types of boxes. The 2 tallest people are able to see over the fence, while the shortest person cannot. Above this image is equality, and below it says the assumption is that everyone benefits from the same support. This is equal treatment. The second image has the 3 people standing on different number of boxes so they can all see over the fence. Above is the word equity, and below is the description, everyone gets the supports they need. This is the concept of affirmation action, thus producing equity. The third image shows 3 people looking through a see-through fence rather than standing on boxes. Above the image is the word justice, and below is the description. All 3 can see the game without support or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systematic barrier has been removed. So this is what we are working towards when we put accommodations in place or using universal design. Next slide. The accommodation process. So students register with the Accessibility Services Office and provides documentation of disability from a qualified professional, for example, psychologist, psychiatrist, or physician. Student and access advisor meet to discuss the documentation and recommended accommodations, barriers and functional limitations they experience in an academic setting. The functional limitations are something that our office does look for, as 2 individuals can be diagnosed with a similar diagnosis or the similar thing, but how it impacts them in their daily lives can be very different. Appropriate accommodations for classroom and exam settings are discussed. Accommodations are generic and may not apply to every course. An accommodation letter is created and student emails it to their faculty members. Next slide. Students who have academic accommodations are required to meet the same academic standards as any other student in this course. There's an image of a desk with an apple and a chalkboard that says the standards. This is important as even though students have accommodations, they still are required to meet the same expectations of the course. Next slide.
So I'll be discussing the process changes for the virtual environment. Accessibility Services continues to provide services to students and faculty. We are using both phone and Google Meet, depending on the type of service being provided, in order to connect with students and faculty. Access Advisors conduct student intake meetings and respond to student and/or faculty concerns. We have our Assistive Technology Advisors who support students with assistive technology and troubleshoot technology concerns. And then there are the Academic Strategists who support students with planning and organization. And then our admin staff will continue to set up appointments, process emails, and respond to general student and faculty questions and concerns. Next slide, please. So faculty handbooks. We have created a couple of faculty handbooks to help faculty that are working both on campus and online. So first we have the Virtual Faculty Handbook, which is to help faculty with the transition to remote learning and how accommodations apply. We've also updated the handbook for on-campus courses. These handbooks review roles and responsibilities of students, faculty, and accessibility staff and answer some FAQ. They are available on our website, or you can click the links directly in this presentation. We will review the key points for virtual learning, and further information can be found in the handbooks. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, there is an image of a desktop computer and a monitor beside it. Next slide, please. Process changes continued. So accommodation letters. Faculty will receive accommodation letters directly from students in an email. Some accommodations will not apply to the remote environment, i.e. writing in accessibility offices, and some other specifics will be discussed later. Faculty acknowledgement. Faculty acknowledge accommodations in an email to the student CCing accessibility@mtroyal.ca. Accommodate. Students will not schedule exams and accommodate. Faculty must keep track of accommodated students and their accommodations, and also apply those accommodations. And I saw earlier some questions popping up related to the exam, so we will definitely be discussing that. Next slide, please.
I'd just like to jump in. This is Janet. With regard to one of the questions that came up, you don't need, from Richard, asking, do we need to sign something? So instead of having to sign the faculty acknowledgement form, which we did in the past, what we're asking you to do is just copy us on the email saying to the student that you acknowledge that they have accommodations, and then we track all that information. So you don't need to sign anything while we're in this non-person environment.
Okay, next slide, please. Assistive technology. Students are responsible for ensuring they have access to the assistive technology they require. I know this has been a question we've gotten a few times, and yes, students will have the technology that they need. They will have an assigned assistive technology advisor who helps set up technology and demonstrate how to use it. Some examples of assistive technology include text-to-speech software, which reads words on the screen aloud, dictation software in Google Docs or MS Word, and this is where you speak into a microphone and it types it for you. Zoom text software magnifies and reads screens aloud, and JAWS software is a screen reader for individuals with vision loss. Next slide, please. Universal design for learning. I believe Janet will be speaking to this more later, but we encourage faculty to use universal design principles. UD supports the broadest range of students, whether they have a diagnosed disability or not, or whether or not they are registered with accessibility services, as not all students with a disability will register with our offices. Universal design supports students in both on-campus and remote learning environments. UD principles will be modeled in this presentation today. Next. Oh, and there is a photo of the silhouette of many people of what appears to be all different ages, sizes, and abilities. Next slide, please. Any questions at this point?
I'm just going to jump in. This is Andrea. I'm going to stop recording so folks can ask their questions without worrying about the recording, and we'll start again when the presentation begins again. So I will let you know